Hi, my name's Will. I'm 18 and I have severe mental health problems. And so I kind of just wanted to give a overview of what my treatment on the NHS was like. The good, the bad. I'm not gonna just, have a go at the NHS for no reason. But I think it's important to share my experience so other people can know what to expect, firstly, and maybe take my advice in helping them to get the treatment that they need. So, for a bit of background, I have what's called treatment-resistant depression, which is where you don't respond to both therapy and medication. I've had it for 2 years now. I also have generalized anxiety disorder, and Asperger's syndrome. So, as a kind of summary of what my kind of experience going through the system was like. When I was very young, I was diagnosed with Asperger's by CAMHS, but I don't really remember that, so I'm not going to talk about that. So I'll start, I guess, with what happened with me. So when I was 13, I think, I was bullied for about a year, constantly, humiliated in front of a lot of the people I knew in my form at school. And unfortunately, it had quite a traumatic effect. I started developing social anxiety when walking to and from school, when walking around school, where I'd be thinking about what, someone standing there be thinking, what they think of me, how I'm walking, what my stance is like, what my facial expression's like, all the tiny little details that are really meaningless, but it really got in my head. And so, until I got to age 17, I didn't really think of it as a problem, because I never really asked for help that much. I kind of managed my own problems. And I didn't realize it, but it was actually creeping up on me quite badly. And so as the years progressed, I got kind of worse and worse and worse with the anxiety, but still didn't think of it as a mental health problem because I didn't really understand what that was at the time. But when I was 17, in the first year of sixth form, I started developing depression. And it kind of came out of nowhere. I remember the first bit, it was like, it's like imagine if your pet died, but then that feeling kind of just stayed there for no reason. And so I remember I started just crying in class. I'd just stare at the wall and start crying for absolutely no reason. And I was supported really well at school because I had support in relation to my Asperger's. But eventually I had to leave since it just got worse and worse. But I sought treatment in September of 2018, so when I was 17, and went to my GP. They prescribed an antidepressant called fluoxetine, and I didn't really want therapy at the time, which in retrospect was quite a bad idea, but still they went along with it. And they also put a referral into CAMHS, which is the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service in the UK. And so, after about a month or two, I think, I saw my first therapist at CAMHS, went in with my parents, and I'll be honest, I had a few sessions with them, and they were really bad. I'd tell them what my problem was, and they would go, okay, that's interesting. Okay, let's move on. And no matter what I said, he'd just keep on doing that, kind of just moving on from the issue without actually giving any useful advice, or even any advice. And so then, my parents complained, and I got a new therapist who, they were amazing, and much more, much more skilled, I guess, in terms of the mental health profession. And then eventually I saw a consultant psychiatrist who was also absolutely amazing. I guess my first session I kind of told him what my problems were. He stopped my first antidepressant fluoxetine as it had basically no effect. Made me feel like my emotions were a bit dull, but otherwise had no meaningful effect. So he switched it to one called sertraline, and those are both selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which are the most common type of antidepressant prescribed, SSRIs for short. But unfortunately the sertraline didn't help as well, had exactly the same kind of emotion numbing effect, but didn't help. And then, I was having therapy at the same time, which was helping a bit. My therapist gave me some good advice. I was having trouble sleeping, gave me some good sleep hygiene tips, made a kind of safety plan as I started getting a bit of suicidal ideation. But then I think after that, we stopped the sertraline after a few months, as it obviously didn't work. And I guess from there I kind of got progressively worse quite quickly. Definitely wasn't due to coming off the sertraline, but I don't know, I guess circumstances kind of changed at home. And so I started getting suicidal. It started off with self-harm. I think I first got like a compass, you would use in maths, and kind of just scratch along my arm, up and down, over and over and over again to make a mark. I'd write words, symbols, whatever. And it didn't seem so bad at first. It kind of gave me a little bit of relief for a little bit, but my parents noticed, obviously. We told CAMHS, and they tried to help. Therapist gave me some advice, but then I started getting quite suicidal. I think the first case was when I tried to slit my wrist, and I was taken to A&E. And this is where the problem starts. The mental health services for people that are in crisis in the NHS. Now, if you're under CAMHS, you are told if you're feeling suicidal or you plan on acting on it or anything like that, you go to A&E immediately. And so we did that. My parents took me, and waited for 4 or 5 hours as you usually do. Was saw by a psychiatric nurse, and do you want to know what they told me? Told me to download a mindfulness app after I just tried to kill myself. An app. So my parents weren't very happy about that. I had a go at them, as you might expect, and nothing changed. And I was discharged. And then the problem is that I kept on doing it. First few times I think it was, same slitting my wrist thing, but then I overdosed on, I think it was paracetamol, which if you're not aware, paracetamol leads to a very, very painful and horrible death, so do not do that. But I was taken to A&E. They give you something called NAC, which is basically the antidote to it. And if you're there within, I think, about 20 hours, usually you can be treated with no problems. And same thing, overnight, and then saw by the psychiatric nurse, told to download the CALM app, and discharged. And this happened over and over again. Next time it was an overdose of a load of benzodiazepines, like you might know Xanax, which is alprazolam, or Valium, which is diazepam, and a load of my antidepressants, which made me hallucinate. And I was treated like shit in hospital. I remember they told me that I tested positive for a ketamine test. Despite not having ketamine, I don't think I'd ever had it by that point. And then another nurse comes over and she's like, after I start trying to leave, and they were like, no, there was no ketamine test. And so I tried to leave, and a security guard stopped me. And do you want to know who helped me out of all of that that whole experience? The security guard. He sat me down, we talked, let me have a cigarette on the ground, which was really nice of him, and he calmed me down. He made me feel better. The security guard. Not all the specially trained staff, the security guard. And obviously I was discharged in the same way. Download the app and I'm gone. Now, it's worth noting, I think around this point, I started getting so sick and tired of being depressed all the time, and I couldn't take it. That's why I was trying to kill myself. Um, and so there was this kind of stigma around cannabis at the time that, it's not really a drug, it's not bad for you, it's fine, it's just weed. And so, in combination of that and both me reading clinical studies about medical cannabis, usually in America, and the legalization of cannabis in California, I decided to start smoking it. And that was one of the biggest mistakes in my life. You'd think that if someone gets addicted to a drug, it would be something like heroin, crack, meth, but no. It can happen with anything. It could be nicotine, alcohol, doesn't really matter what it is. And so I started smoking it very heavily. Huge amounts every day, multiple times a day. And initially this helped me. It also helped with some of my pain, my physical pain that I have due to other health issues. But, looking in hindsight, all it did was damage. And I was seeing a load of my friends who were smoking it, and they were fine, but the difference was at least most of them, to my knowledge, did not have major mental health problems, and they weren't using it to escape their, awful depression. They were using it, to have a bit of fun. And I didn't understand the distinction between those two at the time, but now I do. But, smoked more of it, and that lasted for about 2 years. Stopped smoking it about a month or 2 months ago now. But for 2 years, very, very heavy use. And by the end, it didn't help me at all. It still helped my pain, but my mental health didn't make me feel better or anything. I just had to have it, otherwise I felt worse than if I didn't have it. And I guess also during this time, when I was seeing my psychiatrist at CAMHS, he prescribed, the antidepressant didn't work, so he prescribed something called quetiapine. And he prescribed it for behavior control and aggression rather than as an antidepressant, which it can be used as. And quetiapine is an atypical antipsychotic, which is obviously used for people that are experiencing psychosis or schizophrenia. And I was on a relatively low dose, but that medication, it didn't help my depression, it didn't help my anger or my aggression. It got me to sleep, which was a problem. It got me to sleep, which was nice. But generally it took away all my energy and honestly made me feel worse, so I was quite on and off in taking that. And yeah, I guess it's also important to note that this continued for a while, the same depressive mood. CAMHS were trying their hardest, my therapist and my psychiatrist, who were still brilliant. And I guess the thing in CAMHS is they're very, very therapy focused, at least today. Which is a good thing, because you don't want to be loading a load of medications into kids. But I was 17, and I was pretty much an adult at that point, but I wasn't being treated as an adult. And because my psychiatrist was a child and adolescent psychiatrist, which means he mainly deals with children and adolescents. And for children, there are only, I think, 3 antidepressants that are approved. So he obviously has a much more limited kind of, I guess, active clinical knowledge of medications. And so I didn't have much options. I was going with the therapy, but it wasn't helping me. And the medication that he prescribed wasn't helping me. And he didn't want to go anywhere else because it was outside of his comfort zone, which is completely fair enough to him. And so, I guess at that point, I'd been in the crisis, been in crisis so many times. I guess one of the, last times I did it, near one of the last times, I cut one of my veins, lost a lot of blood, and this was the day before I had my appointment with my psychiatrist, and so I went in, told him I was very pale. He checked my blood pressure, made sure I was fine. I didn't need to go to A&E. And then he called what's called the home treatment team, which are part of the community mental health team, which is adult psychiatry. So CAMHS have to contact them to get them to come in order to potentially make an inpatient admission. And so they came over, told them everything, told them I'd done it a load of times before, I intended to do it again, because that didn't work, obviously. And they went, no, we're not going to admit you. We're going to send the home treatment team. We're going to, come around, once a day. And so they came around first day. All three of them were absolutely useless. Offered no useful advice. Just repeated stuff that we'd been told by CAMHS. And the important thing I want to stress is that someone coming to your house every day is not going to prevent you from committing suicide. If you want to do it, time it around it. You know when they're coming, so do it before, do it after. It doesn't make a difference. And the other thing is that CAMHS, when you're suicidal, they say to your parent, hide all the knives or the big knives, hide all the medication and put it in a safe. And they don't seem to realise that kids these days are very bright and intelligent and know how to get around this by finding wherever it was hidden, or going to the shop, buying some paracetamol, which you can easily do, or going to multiple shops and doing that. Or in my case, I got a pickaxe, and when my parents are out, I broke the safe open and got medication. And the people who are making the risk assessment of whether someone needs to be an inpatient or not, this isn't CAMHS usually. It's usually a different team. They don't seem to understand that sending someone around every day is not going to prevent someone from committing suicide, or telling their parents to hide all the stuff is not going to prevent them from committing suicide. That child or teen or whatever can still do it. And they don't seem to understand that the risk is so much higher being at home than being an inpatient, but they just seem to kid themselves into thinking that, this advice will stop them, because it won't. And inpatient admissions now are so hard to get. If you have paranoid schizophrenia, then you'll be admitted, obviously, because you're a danger to both yourself and the public. But if you're only a danger to yourself, and you don't have, the worst case of depression they've ever seen, they won't admit you. And so you're left at home, either seen by the home treatment team, which, obviously in my case, 1 out of 7 times I was seen by them. Other times I was told to download an app and go home. And so there's this major problem in the NHS where the crisis service is just not fit for purpose. And more on that is that no one should have to wait until they're in crisis to be treated. This is the problem. So if you have mild depression or moderate depression, as it's kind of scaled as by the screening tools and the DSM-5, then you will be treated for that by your GP, and they won't refer you because it's not you aren't bad enough to fit into CAMHS or whatever, because they don't have enough space to accept you because they're all underfunded and not fit for purpose. Despite a lot of the people in them being amazing, it's hard to work when you don't have the funds to do what you need to do to achieve good clinical outcomes. And so this whole system is based on the idea that you have to be in crisis to get help. And so wouldn't you be thinking that maybe, this person had mild or moderate depression. If we leave it for 2 years, say, and they develop severe depression, severe anxiety, suicidal ideations, that person is then going to be much harder to treat. Because you need to understand that usually when you have what's considered a simple depression, like mild, moderate depression, you can be given an antidepressant and therapy, and it usually is quite effective in helping. But if you have severe depression and anxiety, suicidal ideations that's been going on for years, that then kind of becomes more of a complex depression or a complex case of mental health, which then is much harder to treat. Like an antidepressant, if you look at the clinical studies, antidepressants work well with people with mild or even severe but simple depression with no other comorbidities, which is you know, when you have something like anxiety as well as the depression. But it's just ridiculous, really, because all the NHS is doing by that, they're kind of avoiding all those people because obviously they're gonna that they don't have the capacity to take them. But if you don't treat those people early, the chances are that they're going to develop severe depression and then are going to be much harder to treat, which is going to cost the NHS even more money. And it's such a flawed, kind of flawed logic. And another thing that's really important to talk about is IAPT, which is the program the NHS is running for therapy given, in the community. Um, if you see your GP for, a kind of milder depression, they'll refer you to your local IAPT scheme. And do you want to know how long it took for me to get accepted? Because obviously I've been in CAMHS, but that referral is still going. I didn't know it was still going, but it was. Do you want to know how long it took to get accepted? 1 year and 2 months to get therapy. 1 year and 2 months. Imagine if you're suffering and you might even die due to suicide, and yet you're not being given therapy because you have to wait 1 year and 2 months to get it. It's utterly disgraceful. And the other problem is that, from what I've heard, at least, most of the therapists in the IAPT schemes aren't that good. And generally, you're doing almost a kind of a postcode lottery to get a good therapist. And if you don't, well, you can wait even longer. And I'll be quite brief on this, but the NHS has this fixation on what's called CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy. It has a good amount of evidence, very good, strong evidence. But the problem with CBT is that it tends to kind of wear off after a few years. And the NHS has now clung on to this idea of just using CBT so heavily. They offer counselling in CBT, and counselling is obviously just basic. You talk to your therapist. They're not doing really psychological work. It's just letting things out. And CBT doesn't work for you? Tough luck. No other psychological therapy apart from counselling. And if you want actual psychotherapy, you can pay private, which so many people don't have the money to do. And the same thing goes for psychiatry. If you're getting a shit experience, you can't get a psychiatrist, you can pay private, or you can bugger off. That's the system in the NHS. And I don't know many people who have the money to afford private healthcare. And that's the point of the NHS, to provide free healthcare to all. But there's no point of giving them free healthcare if that healthcare is flawed and is not fit for service. Or purpose even, not service. So, I guess to summarise, CAMHS is not fit for purpose. At least where I'm from. I was from Wilmslow, and I was in the Macclesfield base of CAMHS under the Cheshire and Wirral Partnership. But yeah, in my opinion, it's not fit for service. It's underfunded, and the whole crisis system is so flawed that it may as well just be abolished. Obviously not just abolished, replaced, but still, it needs to be abolished or fixed. And there are some very good people in CAMHS, but if the system doesn't work, they're not going to be able to achieve good clinical outcomes, which is so important. And as the NHS gets more and more and more and more and more mental health referrals, they need to come up with a new way of dealing with this. And they also need to fix the problem of people being treated by their GPs for mental health problems, because GPs are not comfortable with treating mental health problems generally, unless a consultant psychiatrist or whoever has been, told them what to do. So, yeah. Well, if you have any questions or you need help, please ask me, because I know from experience that if you're in CAMHS, you don't just get the treatment you want. You have to beg for it. You have to be very assertive. You have to even shout at them for it, which you shouldn't have to. And if you imagine someone that's very depressed who can't really speak to people, do you think they're going to be assertive? They're going to be assertive? No, they're not. And luckily my parents did that for me. But imagine if you couldn't do that, if you don't have parents. What then? Doesn't really matter. But yeah, anyway. If you have questions, need advice, anything to do with the mental health service in the UK, or even just mental health in general, please post a comment. I'd love to help out. And I hope my experience, and my opinion at least, helps someone, and gives people that maybe aren't so clued up about mental health a better idea of what the service is really like. Thanks for watching.